It began on what seemed like an ordinary evening. During a routine discussion about paying a bill, she said, "I'm not your property." Her words felt like a storm cloud, challenging the foundation of our relationship. I questioned whether I had been controlling or if she was rejecting shared responsibilities. That night, I resolved to respect her declaration. The next day, I stopped managing tasks I usually handled: bills, repairs, errands. At first, she seemed puzzled, then annoyed, but I stayed calm, letting her take charge. Tensions rose as routines unraveled. The turning point came when the power was cut off because I hadn't paid the utility bill. When she confronted me, I reminded her, "You're not my property, so I'm not your caretaker. Independence means taking responsibility." Her frustration mounted as she faced the consequences, handling bills, household tasks, and challenges alone. By the week's end, the house was in disarray, and silence replaced our usual rhythm. It wasn't about pettiness, but balance, redefining accountability in our relationship. The tension grew into a cold war. We moved like strangers, speaking only when necessary. On Saturday, she slammed the fridge shut and said, "This can't keep going." "Are we even a team anymore?" I asked, reminding her of her words. "You didn't want to feel indebted, but that goes both ways." Her voice tightened. "I didn't mean for you to check out completely. And yet you did nothing to stop it," I countered. The argument escalated, both of us pointing out years of unmet expectations. When she asked, "So what now?" I admitted, "I don't know, but I'm done carrying everything alone." She left the room quietly, a far cry from slamming doors earlier that week. The house felt unbearably quiet, like the aftermath of a storm. In the days that followed, the divide deepened. We moved around each other, interactions tense and minimal. Then Emily called me, worried. "She's not answering her phone. Is everything okay?" "She's fine," I deflected. "Maybe you should ask her about it." That seemed to be the end of it, but it wasn't. A few days later, my mother called. Apparently, my wife had confided in her during a moment of frustration. My mother's tone was stern, the way it had been when I was a teenager in trouble. "What's going on between you two?" she demanded. "She said you're refusing to help with anything. That doesn't sound like you." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "It's complicated." "Well, maybe you should uncomplicate it," she snapped. "Marriage isn't about keeping score. It's about partnership." Her words stung, but I didn't argue. There was no point in explaining the nuances to someone who wasn't living in our house, who didn't feel the weight of unspoken expectations and resentment that had built up over years. The fallout wasn't just personal, though. The strain started creeping into other areas of our lives. At work, I found myself distracted, replaying conversations in my head, wondering where it had all gone wrong. She was dealing with her own challenges. I overheard her on a Zoom call with her boss, apologizing for missing a deadline. That wasn't like her. She was always the one who had it together, who stayed on top of things. But lately, the cracks in her professional demeanor were starting to show. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the couch with her laptop open, her face buried in her hands. She looked up when she heard me come in, her eyes tired and red. "The Wi-Fi isn't working," she said flatly. "I called the provider, but they said the account is overdue." I stood there for a moment, torn between stepping in and letting her handle it. Finally, I said, "You know how to pay it, right?" She didn't respond. Instead, she closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "This," she said, gesturing vaguely at the room. "All of it. I feel like I'm drowning and you're just standing there watching." I wanted to argue, to remind her that this was the independence she had asked for. But looking at her in that moment, I couldn't. She didn't look defiant or strong, she looked exhausted. And that's when it hit me. The consequences of our standoff weren't just affecting her. They were affecting both of us. The house was a mess, the bills were piling up, and we were both too stubborn to admit that this wasn't working. Whatever point I had been trying to make was starting to lose its meaning in the face of what we were actually losing: each other. I sat down across from her, the silence between us heavy. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like a battle. It felt like a stalemate, like we had both run out of moves. "I didn't want it to get to this point," I said finally. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or regret. Neither did I. We sat there for a long time, saying nothing, both of us trying to figure out what came next in the aftermath of everything we'd let fall apart. We didn't fix things that night. There was no magical reconciliation, no heartfelt apologies or promises to change. Instead, the days that followed were filled with an unspoken truce. It wasn't agreement. It was exhaustion. We had reached the limit of what either of us could endure. The first change came in small, hesitant steps. The next morning, I woke up to find her at the kitchen table with a stack of papers, bills, receipts, and account statements. She looked up as I entered the room, and for a moment we just stared at each other. Then she gestured toward the chair across from her. "Can we go through these together?" she asked quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't defiance either. I sat down, and we started sorting through the mess we'd both ignored for too long. She had questions about payments and due dates, and I answered without judgment or sarcasm. For the first time in weeks, we were working together, not because one of us demanded it, but because we both knew it had to be done. That small act of cooperation set the tone for the days that followed. She began taking more initiative, calling the utility companies, scheduling appointments, and even cooking dinner without waiting for me to step in. Meanwhile, I found myself stepping back into roles I'd abandoned, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to help. I'd wash the dishes she left in the sink or take out the trash without being asked. It wasn't a return to the way things had been, but it was a start. The conversations started to come, slowly at first. One evening, as we sat on the couch, watching TV, she muted the show and turned to me. "Do you really think I don't appreciate you?" she asked. I looked at her, surprised by the sudden question. "Sometimes. It felt like you didn't," I admitted. "Like everything I did was just expected. Never noticed." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't mean for it to feel that way. I guess I got so used to you handling everything that I forgot what it must have been like for you." "And I forgot to tell you when I needed help," I said. Instead of saying something, I just let it build up until it turned into resentment. That honesty was a turning point. We started having more of those conversations, real ones where we said what we felt without fear of starting another fight. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of tension. But the effort was mutual now. Over time, we began to redefine what our relationship looked like. It wasn't about one of us carrying the other anymore. It was about sharing the load. She learned to lean on me without becoming dependent, and I learned to step back without feeling like I was abandoning her. Things weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. The mess in our house slowly disappeared, but the scars of those weeks lingered. They served as a reminder of how close we had come to losing everything and how much work it had taken to find a new balance. One night, as we sat down for dinner, she reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "I don't want to go back to how things were," she said, "but I don't want to lose this either." I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Me neither." And just like that, we found our new normal, not as property or responsibility, but as partners, learning to navigate the messiness of life together.